Salam Alaikum, and I hope you are all well. Since it's been mentioned quite a few times on this channel that thinking and pondering about the Qur'an is really the best way for Muslims to understand the Islam of God and so the Islam of the Prophet himself, I thought it would be interesting to read with you one of the early surahs of the Qur'an. Now, why one of the early surahs? Well, because for one thing they are short, and I already think this video will be quite long. But more importantly, since this is the first time doing this, let's use one of the first surahs of the Qur'an to be revealed. Or maybe I shouldn't say one of the first surahs, maybe I should just say one of the early surahs. So it's one of the first 20 that was revealed. Now there's an interesting idea I'd like to talk about first. It was put forward by a Sudanese thinker by the name of Mahmoud Muhammad Taha. He was, surprise, surprise, put to death on charges of apostasy at the age of 76 for preaching his religious views. His idea, which he called the second message of Islam, was in essence the opposite of what the traditional view of abrogation is. He said that the verses and chapters revealed in Maidana were what was appropriate for the time and place and culture as a basis for Islamic law or Sharia, but it was the first message of Islam, the verses and chapters revealed in Mecca, that were the true religious components and the ideal religion. So he believed that those ideals were meant to be revived again once humanity reached a certain level of progress and development where they could accept them, understand them, and use them to form a renewed Islam, a Meccan Islam based on freedom and equality. That's basically the gist of his idea. I think you can see why I'm saying it is the reverse of traditional abrogation. Now, I don't think he was altogether wrong or altogether right, but it does highlight something important when you look at the Meccan surahs versus the Medina surahs, and even more so when you look at the early Meccan surahs like we all do today. Think of it this way: when the Qur'an is first being revealed, it is essentially being revealed onto a blank slate, so to speak, a people who hadn't received a warner or scripture beforehand. It was like a first impression, and first impressions are important. In your first impression, you want to get across the gist of what you are and what you want to say, your mission statement, before going into the details. So with that in mind, just look at the first 20 or so surahs before any serious conflicts arise. So what do you find? What are the important messages in these surahs? Do you find you must believe in God and warnings about shirk? Or do you find contemplation using nature, commentary on various human conditions, warnings of the transient nature of this world, that it will come to an end, those sort of things. I'm just calling them off the top of my head. I don't really have a list or anything right now. And yes, of course, you do find talk of the last day and of reward and punishment in the next life, because there really is a next life, and the soul will live on and receive joy or happiness, reward or punishment, etc. But for who? For who do these surahs talk about? The believers and the disbelievers in Muhammad? No, he isn't even mentioned. Or are the rewards and punishments mentioned for those of high or low qualities, those of moral or immoral actions, those who can control their lower desires and seek virtue versus those who won't and instead oppress people? Now, of course, the cynical can make a case that basically says, yeah, well, that just shows even more so that Muhammad started off good and then got angry because only a few of his people followed him. So he changed the message once he got to Medina and gained power, etc., etc. I'm aware of all of that, but that's a whole other topic, an area that I'm not getting into right now. I'm here speaking as someone who has thought through all of that, and I'm still a Muslim, and I still believe this Qur'an is from God. I see the whole of the Qur'an as consistent, but that doesn't mean I'm blind to the very reasonable assumption that can be made, and which is also true about many thinkers, writers and philosophers throughout the ages, that their early work is notably different from their latter works. This is true from Imam al-Shafi'i to the philosopher Wittgenstein. And that's just what happens when people continue to evolve their ideas and to write down their ideas at different stages of their lives in different works. You can compare those works and actually see their development and see how some of their early work is the foundation of some of their latter work. But you will also see retractions, changes and contradictions, and some ideas are discarded and replaced with others. So I get it that some will see the Qur'an like that. After all, it is a collection of revelations spanning 23 years. But what I can see in the Qur'an isn't that at all. What I see is more similar to how a fully formed book and thesis is written. What I mean by that is that when someone writes a thesis or a book, the early parts are in some ways more important than the latter conclusions, because they set the path and establish the foundation upon which the rest is built. Once those are in place, the conclusions generally follow and don't deviate much from it. Not only that, but the conclusions themselves can only be important if they are addressing a problem and can answer the question, what exactly is the problem, which is set forth near the beginning of a book, not the end. Identifying or solving the problem is what that conclusion is directed at. It's the purpose of the book. So with all of that in mind, you could consider that the early Meccan surahs are more important than the latter Medina ones. The early Meccan surahs are what the revelation intended, so to speak. They are what was hoped for in the beginning, what was supposed to be accepted straight away. Or think of it another way. Would we have the Medina surahs had Mecca embraced Islam rather than persecuted, expelled and attempted to kill the Prophet and his followers? What would the Qur'an have looked like then? Anyway, those are just some preliminary thoughts, and as I said, I do see the Qur'an as perfectly consistent. Now on to the surah that I'd like to talk about, a surah that I like to call Surat al-Deen, though its traditional label is Surat al-Maa'un. Now some Qur'an alone Muslims may dispute this, but the current names of the surahs are really just traditional Muslim labels for them. They are just a way for us to identify which revelation we are talking about. They aren't part of the revelation and are not divinely revealed. And that's how it should be, I think. Most surahs have such depth in them and speak about so many different things that one name will not fit. So there really aren't any names, only labels. The surah of the bee or spider just means that surah where the bee or spider is mentioned, nothing more. Only one surah is given an actual name, and that's Surah al-Ikhlas, the surah that starts قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. And Ikhlas is not a word used in that surah or anywhere else in the Qur'an. But it is an apt description. Had the surah been named now, it probably would have been called Surat al-Tawheed or something like that by all the different sects. Al-Fatiha also isn't a name, it really just means the opening chapter. So it's also a label. And yes, it probably was the first complete surah to be revealed, more likely before, but maybe also after the first verses of Surat al-Alaq, Surat 95. In the case of this surah, Surah 107, it is labeled as Surat al-Maa'un because that is the last word used in the surah, and the only time it's used in the whole Qur'an. Ma'un means assistance, or what is commonly given as assistance. The small daily or weekly assistance you give to your neighbors, for example. Lend them a frying pan, give them some sugar, that sort of thing. I think a better label, or even a name, would be Surat al-Deen. Let's start reading, and I hope you will see why. So here is the surah. This app that I'm using is a free Windows app. I briefly downloaded and tried about 6 others, and this is the best one that I found on the Windows Store, at least for my purposes anyway. Like I said, this is very likely one of the first 20 to be revealed, and like most of them it's very, very short. Most of them are half a page or less, which also tells us something, that which is being taught is actually very simple. Anyway, this surah here, it's just 7 short verses, but what it says is missed by most, I think. So let's start with the first verse. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين. Do you see, or have you seen, O Muhammad, or you who is listening or reading this, have you seen the one who rejects the deen? Do you know what that looks like? Have you seen somebody like this? فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين. That is the one who repels the orphan and who doesn't encourage the feeding of the poor. Subhanallah, look at this. Simple and explicit in what it means to be a rejecter of the deen. But ask any Muslim scholar. Go to any mosque. What does it mean to reject the deen? What does it mean to reject Islam? And they will never give you the answer that Allah has given here. Don't just take my word for it. Go ahead and ask. Go to any imam of any mosque, east or west. Will they tell you that rejecting the deen and the deen with Allah is al-Islam? Will they tell you that rejecting it is to be harsh and repel orphans and to not encourage the feeding of the poor? Is that what they will tell you? Will they even mention the poor or orphans? Or would they just say that it is to say Muhammad wasn't the Prophet, to deny the Qur'an, not to pray, or even worse, to reject Hadiths or become Shi'i or Sufi, or to say that Ali wasn't the rightful caliph at the time of Muawiyah, etc., etc., all that kind of sectarian stuff that's been put to the forefront above the Qur'an. But the answer that Allah has given, explicitly given in this surah, and Muslims learn usually before the age of 12, you just won't find it. You won't find it. That answer somehow escapes everyone, especially the scholars. Why? Well, because the Qur'an isn't being taken seriously. The Qur'an just really isn't being taken seriously at all. Like it can provide answers to our questions. Forget our questions. Even the answers it gives to its own questions are being ignored and sidelined. And even when something like this is pointed out or recognized, it still isn't taken seriously. It's just seen as a sort of cute answer. It's like they almost say, well, yeah, true, but the real rejection of the Deen isn't that. It is those other things. That is truly rejecting the Deen of Allah. Whereas this, yeah, these are bad things, but no. The rejecting of the Deen is to not pray, for example. Subhanallah, really. Even if Allah is explicitly telling you what a rejection of the Deen looks like, are you going to teach Allah the religion? أَتُعَلِّمُونَ اللَّهَ بِدِينِكُمْ? Are you going to teach Allah the religion? Are you going to teach Him the Deen? No, it's Allah who teaches us. Or are you seeking other than what Allah has taught? Aren't you happy with it? If you aren't happy with it and seek something else, then it won't be accepted and you will have lost out in the end. وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ وَهُوَ فِي الْآخِرَةِ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. And whoever seeks other than Islam as a deen, it will never be accepted from him, and he will be in that next life from the losers. So these verses right here, they are teaching us something. They are teaching us what is at the core of Islam, of the deen. And it's the very opposite of what's been mentioned here. So it's to be good to the orphan and to encourage the feeding of the poor. So if you see someone who is doing that, don't be so quick to say they have rejected the deen. And if you see someone who repels the orphan and doesn't encourage the feeding of the poor, then well, you can be sure you've seen someone who rejects the deen. That's explicitly what these verses are saying. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning of the surah and read it again. Because the Qur'an is meant to be read like this, slowly, verse by verse, and then you'll start to see what is meant to be seen. So from the beginning, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who denies the deen? Have you seen somebody like this? أَرَأَيْتَ. Somebody you can see with your eyes. Have you seen somebody like this? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُّ الْيَتِيمَ. Then you'll see that's the person who drives away the orphan. وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَى طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينِ. And doesn't encourage the feeding of the poor. Okay, so the next verse. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Woe to those who pray, those who do salah, the worshippers. Which is an amazing thing to say, in this surah, which is asking, do you see the one who rejects the deen? There is a verse which says, straight away afterwards, which says, woe to those who pray. Woe to those who pray, salah. Which is ajib, because the main thing when you think of somebody who's religious, somebody who's a religious Muslim, what's the first thing you think about? They pray. They pray 5 times a day. Okay? When you talk about this person, so-and-so, he's a good Muslim, he prays 5 times a day. Those who leave Islam, ex-Muslims, when they talk about themselves, I was so religious, I used to pray 5 times a day, And yet here Allah is saying, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. For those about rejecting deen, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Woe to those who pray. And yes, of course, I'm aware that, how the rest of the surah plays out and, the context, etc. But, just take a minute. Just take a minute. Allah could have said anything else here. وَيْلٌ لِلْمُتَصَدِّقِينَ. Woe to those who give charity. Woe to those who do hajj. Woe to those who this, that, or the other. Many things. But instead it's وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Okay? وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. And it's connected to what's before it. It says فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. So woe, this so, the fa, it's connecting the idea before it to what's coming next. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ is connected to what's come before it. It's as if the surah is saying, don't take salah to be the deen. Don't overemphasize salah. And that's what we see, that Muslim thinks he prays and that's it. He's golden. That's it. Even in the Qur'anist or the Qur'an alone community, there's this huge overemphasis on salah, on discovering the best way to pray, the right way to pray from the Qur'an alone. The salah, I've discovered the right way to pray. The way to do salah, it's in the Qur'an. Which way to face, how to. This huge overemphasis on salah. It's not at the core of the Deen. It's just not at the core of the Deen. Okay, here Allah is saying, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. So beware, those who do salah, sit up, beware. If you're in your head, Deen is salah, right now, beware. Allah is saying, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. But of course, the verse doesn't stop there. It continues, and it gives an explanation of this more so. So, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Who? Which musallin? الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Those who are heedless of their prayers. And be careful here. It doesn't say الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. It isn't about those who are, when they pray, they're unmindful, they're distracted, all of that. No. There's a difference between being unmindful in your prayer and of your prayer, of its purpose, of what it's supposed to accomplish. Okay, so we have وَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, woe to the worshippers. Who? الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. Those who are heedless of their prayers. And who are they? الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Those who make a show. Those who show off. Who just want to be seen. يُرَاءُونَ. Those who want to be seen. Think back to the beginning of the verse. أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Do you see the one who rejects the deen? It says الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ. Those who want to be seen. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ and وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. And they even refuse to give aid. They withhold assistance. Not just withhold it, يَمْنَع. He stops it. He prevents it. In others, not just himself, يَمْنَع, to stop something. وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. And they prevent assistance. And assistance here, like you said, al-ma'un, it's the neighborly assistance here. The translation has even neighborly needs. It's a small, constant assistance, the simple things, but it can be any type of assistance. So we're talking about charity and giving, that kind of thing. So the surah is ending with what it began with. It started off talking about, being good to the orphans and, being charitable. In the middle, we have waylun lil musallin, woe to the worshippers. And at the end, we're saying it's going back to being charitable, being good, being helpful. So this is all connected to the rejection of the deen. The praying for waylun lil musallin in a heedless manner, heedless of the prayer. How are they heedless? Of its purpose. So they pray to be seen. And to be seen, it doesn't have to be of other people. You can even pray just for yourself. You have this sort of feeling of, even when you're by yourself, alone, you are praying and you feel, look, I'm praying, look at me, The Sufis have the idea of ujub and riya. So riya is when you show off for other people, and ujub is when you're showing off for yourself, even when you're alone. So the heedlessness of prayer is when you're doing the showing off, and also another indication of it is that you don't help. You prevent, you withhold your assistance. And the showing off doesn't have to be in salah. It can be in anything, in charity. So when they're outside and people are seeing, they will give a lot of money, a lot of charity. But at home, when the neighbor asks for something, they refuse. The point is, it's all about what's seen. It's all about the external for these people. Because they want to be judged by what's seen. And they also judge each other and others by what is seen. So when they can make a show, they are there. And when they can't, they're not. So, nobody's going to see them given the neighborly assistance, so they're not there for that. And even going back to the first verses, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَىٰ طَعَمِ الْمِسْكِينِ. They don't encourage the feeding of the poor. They won't even encourage others to do it. They might do it themselves if they can make a show of it, but encouraging it in others, there's nothing in it for them. There's no show in it for them. They are all about the external. They judge by it and want to be judged by it. So they won't try to hide a good deed, for example. And they think others are like them and think that nobody else is trying to hide a good deed. So they judge everybody else by the external. And so they are especially there for the salah, because the salah is a big show. 5 times a day they are there for it, And if they see you not praying, you're not there for it, they judge you accordingly, even though they don't know. And this is a problem. You can't judge other people on the basis of salah. As we've seen in the Surah, the focus of the Deen. What is the Deen? It is to be good to the orphan and to encourage the feeding of the poor. Even if you don't have the money to feed the poor yourself, you're encouraging it. And you should try whenever is possible, and if you can, to actually give some food, some actual real food. It really isn't easy to be poor and hungry on the streets. Don't always just give cold, hard, uncaring money. Sure, you can just drop a pound in somebody's hut as you quickly walk past, but why not just bring them some actual food? Really doesn't take that long, especially now. It takes 10 minutes to get some hot food. I mean, how busy are you really? And it's cold out there right now, It's cold on the streets of London. Christmas time and homeless and on the streets. No, it isn't nice. So please, don't just walk past the poor and homeless like they're dead. Like either they are dead or you are dead. Pretending you don't see them. Bring them to life a bit, Bring yourself to life a bit. Walk into the nearest fish and chip shop or something. Buy them a portion of chips, some minced Christmas pies, or a warm burger, or a tuna melt, or something, anything, and say, here you go, or better yet, sit there and eat with them, eat together. Why not? You're in a hurry? Where are you going? You want to catch the next bus, Or are you worried about experiencing a little awkwardness on the streets, or what passers-by might say, Are those your barriers to filling a person's stomach with some hot food? Bringing them a little joy, a little bit of human comfort and recognition coming out of that sea of people that just walk right by as if they weren't there. Yeah, okay, be smart about it, be cautious. Don't do this at 2 a.m. in an empty street, especially if you're a lone woman. But also don't let baseless societal fears be used by shaitan to give you excuses. And do this for your own self, and don't do this for your own self-gratification. Don't go boasting about it to others. Don't tell them what you did. Don't get out your phone to record it. Don't take a picture. Don't post about it. Remember, الَّذِينَ يُرَاءُونَ, those who just want to be seen. Just keep it for God. He sees. Isn't He enough to see? And as for orphans, you might know most of the mosques in your area, but do you know where the nearest orphanage is? And there really are an plight to orphans, even in the Western countries. Don't think it's easy. A lot of really nasty things happens there. Abuse, sex trafficking for the girls. Nobody looks after the orphans. Don't listen to, being a ward of the state and foster homes and that. No, nobody can look after a child like their parents. They need families. They really do. Okay, now going back to the surah. Isn't it interesting that throughout the Qur'an, doing salat and giving the zakat are mentioned together? And that here in this surah, which says woe to the musallin, it links that woe with being harsh to orphans and not encouraging the feeding of the poor. Isn't that interesting? So it's as if the Qur'an is saying that your salah should help you in charity. And if it isn't softening you up at least enough so that you are never harsh to orphans, nor do you, and that you also encourage the feeding of the poor, then woe to you and your useless salah, because you are unmindful of it, not in it. It is likely just for show. Even that show is just for yourself, maybe. You are likely just seeking show, and not only that, but you probably refuse and even prevent assistance even simple neighborly assistance. This surah is telling you that you should always see the person who is good to orphans and encourages the feeding of the poor. You should always see them as better in terms of their deen than the person who prays. And of course, I'm sure some are ready to say that it's better, of course, to do all three. To be a person of kindness to orphans and feeding of the poor, and to do salah as God intended, that's the best. And of course, that's true. But that's also a deception, a way of flippantly dismissing the surah, or not taking it seriously, not taking it seriously at all. Because by just saying it's best to do all three like that, you are putting them all on the same level. Then for a time, you'll go and try to do all three. But because of the religious environment, eventually what will happen to you is, over time, you'll focus more and more on salah. It will again become more and more the way you judge the deen, until the priorities this surah is setting are flipped again. And then you are again right back to where you started, thinking that salah is the pillar of the deen that the Qur'an is trying to teach. It isn't. And then you will again be looking at those who don't pray and saying that they have no deen, when the Qur'an is saying explicitly those who don't have deen are those who repel orphans, don't encourage the feeding of the poor, and are probably quite likely many of those who you see praying in the mosque, even imams and sheikhs whom you think are people of deen and whom you then subsequently imitate in their deen and mannerisms, and so you end up being taken even further from the deen of Allah. So take this surah seriously, really take it seriously. خُذُوا الْكِتَابَ بِقُوَّةٍ, as the Qur'an says. Take hold of the kitab, of the book, firmly, with strength. If you want to be with people of deen, don't start with the people walking to the mosques. Start with the people walking alone to the orphanages with presents. With those going to shelters to give food. Start with them. Then, from them, look at the ones who are walking to the mosques. If you want to be sure about somebody who's, in the mosque. If you want to be with someone whose deen you can be sure of, it isn't about interrogating them about aqidah points in the mosque. And when they are in the mosques, they are silent about their visits to the orphanages. But whether they go to the mosque or not, the ones who go out of their way for orphans and to feed the poor, they are the ones who you can be sure have deen, even if you don't think they are Muslim. So, don't argue with Allah. And like I said, take this surah seriously. If you just sit there and flippantly just say it's best to do all three, you will end up with people who will bedazzle you with their fake shows of deen. You will imitate them and start to go down a path that could end up with you being lost, becoming as fake as they are fake, as empty as they are empty. Nothing but show with a dead heart, just like they are nothing but show with a dead heart. All because to you these verses are just empty talk. You are not willing to let them seriously realign your understanding. Salam Alaikum. Sorry, I had to take a break. So don't let the show, those who want but to be seen of men, those who make a show of their deeds, don't let that cover up what deen is. And don't look at someone who you don't see pray and think badly of them or look down on them. So, like the Qur'an says in a different verse, لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم. Let no people look down upon another people because they may be better than them. Don't look down upon others because of what you see, because they may be better than you because of what you don't see. And this is especially true with regards to women, to be honest, which is why the verse continues specifically mentioning women. And it says, وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ. Nor should women look down upon other women, for the latter may be better than them. This is because women can be especially vicious and cruel to each other, unfortunately, and I think many women can attest to that. So let no woman look down upon another because of what she can see of the other, and because the other one might be better than her. And this is all again comes back to what is seen, what is for show, الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ, those who want to be seen. And of course for Muslim women now it's all about the hijab. What is mostly seen, what is mostly shown is the hijab. So that's seen as a mark of the deen. The woman who wears hijab is seen as religious, and the one who doesn't isn't. And that's an even sadder state than it's even a sadder state of affairs than the issue of salah. even though a large part of this problem is the over-sexualization and the superficial modern world and its utilization of the female form, but still, that's the state that Muslims are in. A woman who wears hijab is seen as religious, and one who doesn't isn't. Look at Muslim convert stories of women. A big question always comes up is, or even when they're just telling their story, when did I start to wear hijab? When will I start to wear hijab? Was it easy? Wasn't it easy? And I understand, of course, the social aspect of it, etc. But again, the focus is just off. Somebody who's just become Muslim and their main thoughts are all about hijab, really. Or I shouldn't say main thought, but it's there. It's very prominent, more than it should be. So this is where women can fall into the same trap as what's mentioned here with Salah. الَّذِينَ هُمْ يُرَاءُونَ وَيَمْنَعُونَ الْمَاعُونَ. Okay, so this verse I think can be applied both to those who wear the hijab and those who don't, how they see each other and how they want to be seen. I don't think that it's beyond women to wear the hijab just to be seen by others. A lot of the dressing that women do isn't even for men, it's for each other. And again, as with Salah, you'll find that those women who wear the hijab and they're wearing it as just for show will usually look down upon those who don't wear the hijab. But a woman not wearing the hijab who looks after orphans and encourages the feeding of the poor really has more deen. And yes, the reverse is true as well. There are also women who don't wear the hijab and look down at those who do. And the same rule applies. And this looking down on each other because they don't recognize what true deen is just creates problems. You get groups of Muslim women, the hijabis and the non-hijabis, and they don't mingle as they should. Women who wear the hijab are almost forced to be exclusively with those who do, and those who don't with those who don't. And in both you have those who have real deen and those whose deen is just for show. And all that division just because of a piece of cloth on the head. Subhanallah. And of course the solution is not to make everyone wear it or not wear it. It's just to not look down on each other. It is for those of real deen who can recognize real deen to stick up for each other and not allow those who don't to mock or look down upon their sisters. And some women might turn around now and say, what have you got to do with this? You're a man. But just remember, please, ladies, that men are also sons, brothers, fathers. We have sisters, daughters, mothers, aunts, nieces. These issues do concern us as well. So first get that right between Muslims, and then maybe you can understand the verse fully and properly. Allah says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, or you who believe, or you who have believed, La yaskhar qawmun min qawmin, let no people mock or look down upon another people. He didn't say La yaskhar mu'min min mu'min. He didn't say don't let a believer look down upon another believer, nor don't let a believing woman look down upon another believing woman. La yaskhar mu'mina min mu'minatin. No, because a non-mu'min, male or female, may be better than a mu'min. There's a balance that will be set up on the Day of Judgment, and not all acts will weigh the same. Looking after orphans and encouraging the feeding of the poor will weigh heavier than Salah. So again, just don't look down on anyone. You don't see everything. And the most noble of mankind, as I've translated on this channel before, the most noble of mankind in the sight of God isn't the most zealous believer, or the one who prays the most, or the woman who always wears the hijab. The most noble are those who have the most taqwa. So again, don't look down on anyone. Even homosexuals and transsexuals, and really it's not right to say even, as if it's the lowest of the low. It isn't by far. Zina between a man and a woman is more of a sin, even though it's less of a fahisha. But even so, though I absolutely do believe it is haram, and even without religion, I think I'd still believe that it's wrong and against nature. So, trigger warning for whoever's listening. But again, a non-Muslim homosexual who's anonymously looking after orphans and feeding the poor can have more deen and have more taqwa than a Muslim imam leading the prayer in Mecca preaching the project of shaitan. And I say could be, but for me it's absolutely clear who has more deen and who doesn't. Than someone leading the prayer in Mecca, leading the salah in Mecca, and praying and shouting loudly, as I've personally heard this, shouting away, Allahumma yattim atfalahum, oh God, make their children into orphans. I mean, come on, God curse you, man. What have their children got to do with it? No matter who they are. When you hear a fool like that, straight away think, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. Have you seen the one who denies the deen? فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي يَدُعُ الْيَتِيمِ. Say yes Allah. I've seen him. He's right there delivering the Friday sermon in Mecca and leading the salah. فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. So woe to those who are doing salah. Really and truly, if that's salah and those are the musallin, then woe to them. Absolutely incredible. And sometimes they even recite these very verses in salah, and then right afterwards they pray, oh God, make their children into orphans, like an oblivious child. And that's what they are really, oblivious, dangerous children. They became that way because as oblivious young men, they followed those who were before them, those who came to pray for show. That's who they learned the deen from. This preacher wasn't with those who looked after orphans or fed food to the poor or encouraged it. No, he spent all his time with those who deluded themselves with prayers in the mosques, unmindful prayers to be seen, those who dazzled him, those who were in reality unmindful of their prayers, nor did they even give neighborly assistance. They drove around in huge cars, lived in huge mansions. I mean, just look online and see how some of these shuyukh live, Yura'un, they want to be seen. And also they don't give the neighborly assistance. In every neighborhood there's poverty. And so that young man grew up in their path, and now he's just one of them. If someone had told him the essence of the deen is to be good to orphans and to encourage the feeding of the poor, not salah, he would have replied, yeah, but it's better to do all three. See what I mean? They won't take the book firmly and seriously. Or they can't even see. Summun bukmun umyun fahum la yarji'un. Deaf, dumb, blind, so they will not come back. That's it. They've gone, travelled far down the path that shaitan and hypocrites have set. They won't come back. They won't retrace their steps. How can they? The Qur'an is behind their backs and they won't even turn around. And that's what happens when you ignore God's warnings about the real enemies, shaitan, the hypocrites and their allies. The enemies aren't Hassan Farhan al-Maliki in prison in Saudi Arabia, or Junaid Hafiz in prison in Pakistan on death row. No. Anyway, I think I'll stop there. What I've tried to do here is just to try to give a reading of the Quran to show just how it can be read, how you can read it into the world around you, into your own experiences, into what you see. The Quran literally means the reading. I think. And this is where I disagree with the recently passed and amazing thinker and researcher Dr. Muhammad Shahrur. May Allah bless him, grant him peace, forgive him his faults, reward him according to the very best of his actions, and admit him into God's presence in the company of the prophets, the truthful ones, the witnesses for truth, and the righteous. Ameen. But yeah, I disagree with him in the meaning of the word Qur'an. And it's a little awkward to talk about what I disagree about in his very intricate and very intricate and elaborate definitions of Quranic terms. But maybe this will actually prompt some of you to try to read his work, and maybe others to correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, he says that the term al-Kitab means the total content of God's revelation to Muhammad, i.e. what we typically call the Qur'an, he calls the Kitab, while Al-Qur'an is only part of the book according to him, and it's contained within it. Only some of the verses are the Qur'an and the rest are part of the book, Al-Kitab, but not the Qur'an. According to him, the Qur'an are those verses related to Muhammad's prophethood. It's about the unseen. It is those verses which deal with the unseen and the unknown. And he further divides them into two groups, the unseen of nature and the unseen of history. So the unseen of nature includes the start of creation, the events of the afterlife, etc. And the unseen of history are things like the stories of the prophets. And these two unseens together are also called Hadith, according to him. So you have verses like هل أتاك حديث موسى, has the news, the Hadith of Musa reached you? And verses like هل أتاك حديث الغاشية, has the news, the Hadith of al-Ghashiyah, the overwhelming event reached you. Because Hadith just means a discourse or transmitted news, and a discourse may be believed or disbelieved. As you can see, he gets very, very technical and honestly gets into other divisions and subdivisions that I can't make heads or tails of. I find them very muddled, to be honest, and I don't know if it's because it is muddled or because I'm just not understanding despite my best efforts. Which to me is already a problem, because knowledge taken from the Qur'an should be easy to see and it should stand out brightly when it's pointed out. One of the key ways he makes this separation of Qur'an and Kitab, for example, I've always found very, very muddled. So maybe someone could clarify it for me. He quotes the verse that says, the Qur'an is guidance for mankind, Al-Qur'an hudan lin-nas. And then the verse that says the book, no doubt in it, is guidance for the muttaqeen. ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. And then he says that since only some of mankind are muttaqeen, and therefore the muttaqeen are a smaller group included within mankind, it must also then follow that the Qur'an is a smaller part of the book and contained within it. And that seems to me like a blunder, even following his logic, because he seems to have flipped them around. It is the Qur'an which is for the larger group of mankind, according to this verse. And so that must contain the book, which is for the smaller group of muttaqeen. So if anything, it should be that the book which is only a part of the Qur'an and not vice versa. This, of course, if we follow his train of thinking, and unless I've misunderstood this part of his argument, I'm not sure. Please let me know if you do. And in any case, why would those unseen things be called by God Al-Qur'an, which literally means the reading? I don't know. I mean, I don't know how Dr. Shahrur would have explained that. Is it because unseen things can only be read about in scripture and we ourselves can't experience, see or witness them? So they must be taken on faith. A hadith, quote unquote hadith, that is accepted or rejected. But hadith always meant a discourse at that time, It never meant something written down and then read out or recited for it to also be called a Qur'an. Now, of course, hadiths are read, but the name tells you what they really are. Hadiths that we have now in Bukhari, Muslim, etc. They are discourses, speech. So-and-so said that so-and-so said this or did that. Anyway, that was a little side note and detour. Maybe it will encourage some of you to read his works, because he does have many amazing insights. You can find the book, The Qur'an, Morality and Critical Reason, the essential Shahrur, which has a summary of many of his main ideas. I, however, think Al-Qur'an means just that, the reading, a real, true, deep reading, which is hidden or protected within all of the book, within the Kitab. And a deeper reading also means a higher, more universal reading, as I've tried to show a bit over here. And so it's open for all of mankind. Al-Qur'an, the deeper reading, is all open for all of mankind and at all time, and not just bound by the time and circumstances of the 7th century Arabia. And thus something that you can read into human nature and the world around you, even now. And also none can intellectually touch, meaning لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, the Qur'an says, إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. It is a noble Qur'an في كتاب مكنون, hidden, مكنون, or concealed, protected within a book. لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. None can touch it
except the pure. And yamassuhu, mas is intellectual touching, it's not like lamps. Lamps is to touch something of your hand. Mas is intellectual. Sorry about that. And also none can intellectually touch, meaning truly get to that deeper reading, except with some purity. All of that is contained in those verses, That's how I view the meaning of Qur'an. إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ لَا يَمَسُّهُ إِلَّا الْمُطَهَّرُونَ. Maknoon, the word maknoon is used for how birds sit on and hide and protect their precious eggs. It's also used of pearls which are hidden and protected, maknoon, within clams. And you have to work hard and pry at them, to open them up and get at the pearl within. And that's the Qur'an, the inner aspect of the Qur'an, the inner aspect of the book. And you can only pry open the book and get at the Quranic pearls inside with some degree of purity. Okay, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. And that purity of heart can be found in anyone among mankind. So that's why the Quran is hudan linnas, which is why many among mankind can receive guidance from the book and from the Quran, and see and read the Quran within. They can receive guidance from the book and see and read the Quran within the book, whether they are Muslims or not, while others are deaf, dumb and blind to it. They can read it in the prayer and contravene it with straight afterwards, even if there are imams giving sermons and leading prayers in Mecca. Plus, as has been said on this channel, all of mankind is capable of taqwa, and thus capable of receiving guidance from the book and from the Qur'an, while the most zealot believers may have no taqwa and thus be blind to the Qur'an and receive no guidance from the book. Also note that the Qur'an is described as guidance for mankind in the verse that commands us to fast. And that is an important link too, because all of mankind the world over know that fasting done properly purifies. Yes, it purifies the body, but not just the body. The mind and the heart also gain some purity. And with that purity of fasting, the Qur'an, the deeper reading, becomes more and more accessible, more, much clearer. So I think these words, Qur'an, Kitab, Furqan, Dhikr, etc., in the end all just point to different aspects of the same thing, not to different parts of the same thing, as Shahrur says. Just like the words Bashar, Insan, Ins, Nas, they're all concerning the human being, and they just emphasize different aspects of the human being. Anyway, I've tried to show some of that here to provide an example of reading and pondering, of getting at the Quran, getting at the pearl within. But I think I'm rambling a bit now. I'm not sure how successful this was. It took me quite a while to record all of this, stopping and starting and re-recording. I think you can probably tell. I'm finding it a bit difficult and awkward to just be sitting here talking to a microphone. To a microphone, knowing I can just stop and start and delete whenever I want. My thoughts don't really come and flow as easily as that, even though I'm a pretty practiced and good public speaker and teacher. And also writing them down and narrating them feels flat and emotionless and also a bit awkward. And some of this that I've recorded, some of it has been me trying to just say it from my mind, and others trying to read it off a script. All that is to say that I hope this didn't bore you. If it did, then really what I'd like you to take away from this is to consider methodically reading and thinking over a short surah of the Quran, or a few verses of some, either read a short surah or a few verses of some larger surah that are united in a theme. Actually try to read them yourself, with your own eyes and your own mind and your own heart. See them in your own world, in your own experiences, and also in the world around you and in the people around you, in human nature, etc. Salam Alaikum Warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.